Today we're starting Chapter 5, Section 2, and we're looking at frontiers open to settlement. Our essential question is, how did settlers survive on the frontier? We need to be able to answer this question after we get finished studying Section 2. Our vocabulary words that we need to know: squatter, speculator, and yeoman. Introduction: some settlers are called squatters. They didn't wait to buy land. They just came, cleared the land, and built a cabin. Lands were surveyed, and they sold in 40 or 80 acre sizes. Another of your vocabulary is speculators. They're land investors, and they bought large amounts of land with plans to sell it for a profit. The life of yeoman farmers. Most of the pioneers were yeoman farmers, which means they just lived on small farms. Okay, they grew their own vegetables and hunted animals for food. This kind of reminds me of how I grew up. I grew up working in the garden with my cousins at my grandparents' house. We had 7 gardens, and we planted everything, harvested everything, and then we ate our harvest. It was wonderful. And then the guys in the family, they all hunted for food. So this kind of sounds like how I grew up, and kind of how probably some of your parents or maybe even you grew up. The cattle roamed the woods for food. Building log cabins. Most settlers built log cabins for shelter. Tree trunks were cut and stacked to build walls. Roofs were made of thick boards. Chinking was the process of filling the gaps in the wall with mud, rocks, and sticks to keep out the winds and the rain. Living in the cabin. A fireplace kept the cabin warm and was used for cooking. Streams were used for water. Most cabins had one room and maybe a loft for the children. Now, if you've ever watched Little House on the Prairie, have you ever watched that, guys? If you have not, it is so good. I know your parents have. Ask them to help you find a way to watch it. It's so good. Little House on the Prairie kind of sounds like how things were back in this time period. So streams were used for water. Most cabins had one room and maybe a loft for the children. Mattresses were made of hay, grass, corn husk, Spanish moss, and deer or bear hides were blankets. Most settlers built their own furniture. Farming. The forests covered Alabama, so farmers had to clear areas to make farmland, which might take close to a year. Farm family grew peas, corn, beans, potatoes, sugar cane, and melons. They had to store enough for the winter. We grew all these things too. Sugar cane, one day when you're out and about in the country, you can find sugar cane. You can actually, they come apart in little pieces and you can kind of suck on it, and it's really sweet. Ask your parents about it. So they had to store enough food for the winter. Tobacco and cotton might be grown to sell for money. Today, people still grow cotton to sell for money. I'm not sure about tobacco. I mean, I know that they do, but I don't know of any tobacco farmers, but I know of a lot of cotton farmers. Fun on the frontier. Settlers often lived lonely lives, but neighboring families helped each other. They might work together to build a barn or to make quilts. Storytellers and musicians helped others have a fun evening. Corn shuckings were events to take the husk off corn. Contests, music, and games made the events fun. Education on the frontier. Survival on the frontier was hard, so there was little time for education of children. The first school opened in 1799 and others slowly followed, usually in one-room log cabins. You can also see this in Little House on the Prairie. Schools had no paper, pencils, or books. Some students wrote with chalk on slate. A single teacher taught all grades. Can you imagine? All right, and then next up we'll look at Section 3.